You've heard this before. I need to take the time to go over our virtual meeting rules. Generally, public bodies are prohibited from meeting electronically under the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. However, emergency language approved by the Governor and General Assembly in April of 2020 allows us to move forward with certain restrictions that I will outline below. Before I review these provisions, please let me take a moment to review how this meeting will work. We want to allow for participation by board members, staff, and members of the public who wish to comment. However, it is essential that we are able to manage the conversation effectively. While the meeting will be open for board comment, due to the challenges associated with an electronic meeting, we want to allow the members of the public to be heard. If you would like to make a comment, please indicate so in the chat box and we will call on you. You can put your question in the chat box or just indicate that you have something to say, and either Sue or Gina will be monitoring that and we'll call on you if we can. We'll address your comments as time allows and provide for public comments at the end of the meeting. Please be patient with us as we work through this. We understand and appreciate the challenges. We have to read through a lengthy introduction to our virtual meetings. This is long, but is required to be read aloud under Chapter 1283 for all electronic meetings. Chapter 1283 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly, also known as the Caboose Bill, includes language addressing the ability of public bodies to conduct electronic meetings without the need for a quorum being present in a physical location. This language was submitted as an amendment by the Governor and approved by the General Assembly at their April 22, 2020 reconvened session. The Governor subsequently signed the Caboose Bill, and the bill was effective as of April 24, 2020. The Caboose Bill allows public bodies to hold electronic meetings when the Governor has declared a state of emergency, pursuant to Section 44-146.17 if the nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. The Caboose Bill also has language regarding recordings and transcriptions of electronic meetings. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available to the public through the DCR website. The comments in the chat room will also be preserved as a public record. Official minutes of the meeting will be drafted and posted in accordance with regular procedures. The Caboose Bill does not allow the board to hold an electronic meeting to discuss or transact business for any purpose. Rather, they may do so as long as the agenda items that the public body plans to take up are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is the board's responsibility to determine the nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. At the conclusion of my remarks, I'll ask for a motion for the board to make the subcommittee to make this determination. If that motion fails, this electronic meeting will end at that point. The Caboose Bill requires compliance with the provisions of Section 2.2-3708.2. Therefore, in accordance with that section, the public bodies must include a telephone number that may be used to notify the public body any interruption in the telephone or video broadcast in that meeting. In the event that a disruption occurs, participants should contact me by phone or text at 804-317-8934. Additionally, if there's an interruption in the broadcast, the meeting must be suspended until the public access is restored. Those provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act not addressed by the Caboose Bill remain in effect. Before we continue with the business portion of the meeting, I will call the roll for board members. Other participants will be recorded through the chat window. If you are participating by phone and your name is not called, please call or text me at 804-317-8934. In addition, if any time you lose connection or unable to connect, please contact me at the same number. So I'll now call the roll of those designated subcommittee members. Ms. Booth?
Present.
Ms. Stiff?
Present.
Mr. Ford?
Present.
Mr. Volk?
Present.
So there is a quorum of the subcommittee. I will now present a recommended motion and wait for a board member to request the motion. The recommended motion is as follows. The Virginia Land Conservation Foundation Board of Trustees Subcommittee certifies that the nature of the declared COVID-19 emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the subcommittee to assemble in a single location, and further that the agenda items to be taken up at this meeting are necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the board.
I so move. Do you need me to repeat that verbatim?
No, I've got that. I need a move and a second
Second.
and a roll call vote. Ms. Booth,
Yes.
Ms. Stiff,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Mr. Volk.
Yes.
The motion carried. So I want to further explain how we will handle participation by board members, staff, and the public. Everyone except the individual presenting materials for an agenda item will be muted. Once the presentation is completed, unmute yourself and participate, and the board members can unmute themselves and participate in discussion. We will make sure that you're recognized. And again, as I said before, if members of the public wish to make a comment, please indicate so in the chat box, and we will call on you for that. With that, we will now proceed with the business of the board as outlined on the agenda.
Excuse me for a second. This is Glenda. So if we board members have a question or comment, are we supposed to raise our hand or what?
No, you guys will stay unmuted and you can speak whenever you like.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And did you all want to introduce yourselves? I guess just in the order that we have you listed here alphabetically.
I'm Glenda Booth, board member representing the 8th Congressional District.
I'm Jay Ford, representing the 2nd Congressional District.
Mary Carson Stiff, representing the 3rd Congressional District and Vice Chair of VLCF.
Bruce Vilk, representing the 5th Congressional District.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And as far as introducing ourselves, I guess the best way to do this would be for me to call on people as we go across, or do you want me to just tell you who all of the, I think I recognize who most of these people are listed on the screen. I'm Sue Bobolkaya, and I am the Land Conservation Manager at DCR. Next to me is Gina DeChico and Larry Mickelson, and they both work with me in the Office of Land Conservation. Mike Fletcher, who you heard from, is our board liaison at DCR. And then, let's see, we've got Carrie Richardson from Historic Resources, who's on our interagency task force. Lisa McGee is our policy director at DCR. Stephanie Talon, I'm sorry, I don't remember which locality or group you're with. I know you're an applicant.
Virginia Farm Bureau.
With Farm Bureau, okay. Thank you very much. Tom Smith is one of our deputy directors at DCR. Martha Little is with Virginia Outdoors Foundation and is on our interagency task force. Zach Sheldon is with the Nature Conservancy. Kelly Seaton is with us at DCR. She's with our PRR program. Heather Richards is with Trust for Public Land. Is that right?
The Conservation Fund.
The Conservation Fund. Sorry, Heather. Thank you, Tom. Ellen Shepard's with Vault. Rob Evans is with our Natural Heritage Program at DCR. Nikki's with the Nature Conservancy. Wendy is with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. Crystal's with us at DCR, and she's on our interagency task force for Parks and Open Space. Jen Perkins is with Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and she's on our task force. And Jason Bullock is our Director of Natural Heritage at DCR. Kevin Tate is with the Shenandoah Valley Kevin, I'm sorry, I don't remember. I know you were in the Shenandoah Valley, but that's all I remember. What's the name of your organization? Oh, the conservation, it popped up for me. Oops, where'd it go? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Okay. I didn't hear the end of that. Did you all hear that? Okay. And Kevin is a current applicant for VLCF. Jason Powell is with Senate Finance. And Carl is with Department of Forestry. He's a new person on our interagency task force. Thank you for joining us, Kevin. And Wendy Austin, I'm sorry, can you tell us who you're with?
Yes, hi, Wendy with Friends of the Lower Appomattox River.
Thank you very much. Great. Are there any follow-up questions, Tom? Did you have something?
And I'll jump in, Glenda.
Okay.
I was just going to say that Glenda asked the question about sort of the purpose of the subcommittee. So reading from the September 22nd board meeting, following discussion on public input to the VLCF grant manual, Secretary Strickler noted that he would work to create an ad hoc subcommittee for the purpose of discussing how to improve public input to the grant manual.
Okay. Okay. Were there any further questions about the purpose of the meeting?
Well, this is Glenda. We've had some discussions in the past about trying to do a better job of reaching underrepresented organizations. Is that part of the scope of this subcommittee, our mission? Is that part of a concept of improving public input?
It can be, if that's what you want it to be, yes.
I want to second Glenda in that. I'd like to talk about that area later on, time permits.
Great. Great. Well, I'm going to just do a very quick PowerPoint overview of VLCF just to start with the background, and then we'll turn it over to the board members for your comments and discussion and to learn what your priorities are. Does that sound good? Great. Okay. So very briefly, here's some background on the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation. The foundation was created in statute in 1992, and the grant program was first funded in 2000. The foundation's made up of a 19-member board representing Virginia's 11 congressional districts. The Secretary of Natural Resources serves as the chairman of the foundation. Also, the Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry is on the board, along with 17 citizen members appointed by the General Assembly or the governor. Additionally, our director at DCR, Clyde Chrisman, serves as the executive secretary. The board has different responsibilities, including establishing the conservation value review criteria for DCR to apply to the land preservation tax credit applications that are seeking more than $1 million. The VLCF grant program has received $59 million in grant funding since 2000. The board has held 16 grant rounds, and that includes the current open grant round that closes on April 5th. The board has awarded 237 grants to protect over 90,000 acres so far. And here we have a newly created map that has the 237 points to illustrate where those grants, those projects are located. And I'll send this out to the board members, and we'll have it on our website too. Each of those points, this one doesn't have all the numbers for the points because it made the screen a little too messy. But what I'll send you has numbers associated with each of these points so you can see what the project is, what year it was awarded, and the locality in which it's located. So there's a few requirements set out in the Code of Virginia as well as the budget for the grant program. First of all, the foundation staffed by DCR and as required by the code. And the code establishes the interagency task force to develop the scoring criteria and advise the board on grant priorities. And you met most of these members just a minute ago from Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry, Department of Historic Resources, from DCR. We've got Department of Wildlife Resources and Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And the funds are divided among the 5 statutorily required categories that make up our grant manual and the criteria of our grant manual. The code requires that 25% of the funding received by VLCF be transferred to Virginia Outdoors Foundation Open Space Land Preservation Trust Fund. The budget requires that at least half of the grants funding be used for projects that provide public access. At least 1/3 of the grant funds have to go to projects that secure easements held by a public body. And the code requires that the foundation seek geographic distribution for a fair allocation of funding throughout the Commonwealth. The code also requires that the foundation provide grants to state agencies and matching grants to other eligible entities. So that means that state agencies can request up to 100% of the cost of a project, while other eligible entities can only seek 50% of the funding of a project. Earlier this month, we did hold a listening session and received lots of comments. We summarized those comments and sent that out to the board and posted it on our website or webpage. We also grouped the comments into 4 different categories, thinking it might be easier to break it down that way. And so those 4 categories were comments that would require a change to the code, other general comments that did not require a change to the code, comments that reference the VLCF scoring, and others concerned Conserve Virginia. And so we're not going to read those because you've got those probably that were emailed out to the board members and shared on our website. And then here is our webpage. You can see at the top there, we've already started implementing one of the recommendations to post our material prior to board meetings on our webpage. So we've got that there for this meeting. And then just our contact information. Larry and Gina and I have different responsibilities for VLCF, but we work great as a team, and we're here to help all of you, and as well as all of the grant applicants as we move forward. So that is the end of my presentation. Oops. And I am happy to turn over the meeting to the board members for discussion and to hear what comments you have.
Susan, do you mind sharing your screen during our discussion so we could see the highlights that you posted? That was helpful.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I like the way you categorize them. We did, our section notes don't have that same classification. I was also going to ask, so you adopted the posting of information in advance of the meeting, and thank you so much for that. I think that is really helpful for folks that are trying to follow along. Of the suggestions from the listening sessions, did others jump out at staff? As you all are experts, were there other aha that seems like a good idea moments that so we'd love to hear things that jumped out at you all first before we sort of get into the nitty gritty without your expertise.
Well, I guess just to start at the top of this list, we have been receiving lots of interest from Virginia's tribes. Many different tribes have asked Larry and I about applying for VLCF grants, and if they themselves could apply, or would they need their like a state agency to apply. So that one just jumps out as a very current specific comment that would require a change to the code.
And that is, are they specifically prohibited right now from applying under VLCF money?
They're specifically excluded. The way the language is written, it talks about state agencies, including Virginia Outdoors Foundation, and then it says other eligible entities, and it refers to the definitions in the Conservation Easement Act and the Open Space Land Act, which do not include Virginia's tribes. So I'm happy, I can provide more of a specific citation to all of that if you guys wanted to look into that further. But they're just not included.
Mm-hmm.
And the definitions that are used.
Well, it seems to me that, and this is the first time I've known this or realized it, I guess. It seems to me that they certainly should not be excluded. And my question is, are they requesting like that they be a mandatory category? I mean, I already have problems with the 4 categories that are in the law, and the other mandates in the law. So what do you think they're
They were requesting to be eligible to apply, not to create a new category.
Okay, thank you.
And
And they-
just so I understand, the difference a few years back when we did some work was there was not an issue because that was the Surrey Skiffs funding that went to that project.
Oh, the Chickahominy project. Yeah, that Virginia Outdoors Foundation was the applicant.
Mm-hmm.
So they hold the easement and
Right.
served as the applicant on behalf of the tribe. Okay.
And it was the Dominion Surrey Skiffs Creek funding as well.
And do tribes do conservation through the Open Space Land Act in Virginia? Is that the governing authority?
No, they're not included in the Open Space Land Act.
No, they're
That's
not.
for state agencies and localities.
Localities, yeah.
Governmental, yeah.
Okay. I have a general question, just since you went to the code specific comments first. I am sorry for my ignorance on this issue, but how frequently has the code been modified to reflect interests of either the board or the public or staff to change VLC?
The public has made changes to the code.
Through legislation, right?
Through legislation, yeah. A couple years ago when we started doing the pre-application report to the General Assembly. Before that, Nikki is on, if she's on the meeting, she would know more specifically about what other changes that were made by the land trusts. But not very often. It's more about the funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think they've primarily revolved around the tax credit review or some funding tweaks when there've been, larger budget issues that may have impacted VLCF.
Mhm.
Well, are
And-
we going to go down each of these points
No.
on the screen?
Let's see.
Jay had requested that the staff kind of weigh in on the things that they felt were compelling and maybe changes that could be easily made like they did with the posting of the agenda on the website. So I think that is where we were. And then I interrupted with the question.
I'm just looking down again, like to the non-code specific ones. We're sharing the meeting materials. Allowing for other, and we do the second to last bullet under the non-code specific comments. We tried to make it clear in the grant manual that we will allow other models to be used in the application process for the new scoring criteria as far as underserved communities. And there might be another one that we also were saying, please, tell us what models you'd like to use and send us the link, and we'll try to incorporate those into our scoring. Let's see. Turning the page here to the next slide. This first one.
Sue, before you move to that one,
Yeah.
can I
Sure.
ask about
Yes.
the one about public comment?
Yes.
So it would be the fourth one, right?
Right.
So someone suggested that at our meetings that the public comment be held before we vote and make a decision. What is the staff's reaction to that suggestion? Does that make sense? I'd certainly like to hear.
Yeah, the public comment and the way board meetings are held has sort of, it changes over time with the different secretaries we've had. So that's up to the board, and it makes sense. Our meetings are already very long, but I understand when we're going
That's
over
okay.
those applications. So if that's a recommendation that you all want to make, we're supportive of it. Mhm.
Okay, well, I don't know what our process is, but I would recommend that.
Yeah, I would also like that.
I support that as well.
Could I also support it. Could I make a suggestion then, back to Tom's notes at the beginning? Why don't we go ahead and pick a chair? And that way, if we want to make a recommendation on one of these topics, we can go ahead and check them off. And I'm assuming, looking at staff, that if we are recommending something, we're just including this in a report to the full board. So, but that way we can get into the nitty gritty. Does that make sense for folks?
Yeah,
Yes.
I nominate you, Jay.
I was going to nominate you.
Oh, okay, we can nominate Glenda.
No, I don't want to take it on. I mean, I'm very interested, but I just can't take on another chair position at this time.
I second Jay's nomination on Mary Carson Stiff.
Oh my God.
Sorry. All right. All in favor of Mary Carson?
Oh my gosh.
Aye.
Fine.
All right. Take it.
Okay. All right. So we talked about the public comment period. We definitely recommend that in the subcommittee. And then I know that the application process, materials being posted on the website. It's great to see that happen. And is there any kind of guidance on how far in advance that might happen? I know that that's something that came up too.
We, just the normal way we do it is we send it out to the board members, and after we send it out to you, we can post it and share it publicly.
So, okay, so, but, right, so right before the comment about public comment period, moving that up, I think, Susan, you were advancing to the next slide to kind of continue board reactions for things that could be easily fixed.
Right. Well, this is, I mean, these were just ones that Jay had mentioned, you know, so I wasn't picking and choosing any of these other than like what he had asked for, ones that stood out.
Yes.
Not to diminish the importance of any of them.
No, I think it's great. I mean, I agree with Jay. Having staff report out on their impressions is really important since you all are the staff running the show.
Glenda had brought to our attention a few months ago comments from Mike Nardolilly from Northern Virginia and his efforts to protect drinking water resources. So that's one that stands out to me only because we've heard about it for a while now. And then the rest, I mean, all of these have merit.
Well, but Sue, before you leave that one, and just for everyone's benefit, Mike Nardolilly is with the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, charged with basically protecting drinking water, and Potomac River supplies drinking water to, I don't know, I've got the numbers, but 85% of Northern Virginia, something like that. Anyway, what is the staff's reaction to that suggestion that there be more points to protect not just water resources, but drinking water resources? Does that make sense?
That had been in our scoring criteria, actually. We looked back into old grant manuals, and that was in the additional scoring criteria for up to 3 points in the past that would apply across the board to the different categories. So it's interesting, we don't know why it was removed from that category over the years, but to add it back would certainly not, it would be very easy to add that back.
And I'm just gonna, this is Tom, I'll just jump in to say that I think the intent here was, you know, for this group to meet to talk really about improving public input into the grant manual. I don't know that we're going to get into a lot of specifics about individual scoring criteria.
Mary Carson, could I say something? Is that good? Yeah. Two things to Tom's point. One, I agree. We do want to hear how we can improve public input, but also I think I was the one that asked for this at the September meeting, and what we were specifically responding to was that people wanted a forum to provide suggestions that could then be carried to the board. So I do think we have really dual purpose here. We should try and front load public access and the ability for stakeholders to weigh in, but I don't think it's inappropriate for us to look at what they said and pass along worthwhile suggestions to the full board for consideration.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And you know, we may have to have multiple meetings. So we can agree today to discuss process, and at another meeting discuss criteria, and another meeting discuss changes in the law, something like that. I mean, I'm willing to do whatever process you want to set up, but I have a responsibility, we all do, but I have to represent my 8th district constituents as well.
Tom, you're cutting out on me. I don't know
Yeah,
if you are for others as well.
I hear you, and I don't mean to be argumentative. I'm just referencing back to the board meeting and sort of what the, oh, yeah, I don't mean to be argumentative. I'm just trying to reference back to the manual or to the board meeting in terms of what the charge was.
Oops, sorry.
Well, Mary Carson, should we agree at this meeting to discuss process?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I don't know that there are that many process issues that were raised, right? I mean, do you think that there are enough process issues to fill this entire meeting? Or can't we step into the space of categories?
I don't know, but we discussed two, I think. And then there's the issue of, I don't know, more aggressive outreach to reach a broader diversity of organizations. There's that issue. I'm not trying to dictate here. I'm just trying to facilitate and figure out what we're doing.
No, I think it's great, Glenda. Thank you. Well, why don't we try? So, okay, so we've heard from staff. Anything else that you wanted to add, Susan?
No, I mean, there's, just, we've got it all listed here. So if anything jumps out to you all, we're happy to fill in any questions that you guys have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then I suggest we move to kind of board members' interests and discussion. And Glenda, like your suggestion, let's start with process first, see how far we get, and then we can move to other stuff.
Sue, would it be possible for you to go back one slide too?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Okay. So we can start with do we want to start with I guess inclusion of the process does include the inclusion of the tribal community's ability to apply. Now that's a code change. And so I don't know if we want to get into the details of how the staff recommends we move that recommendation forward. And I guess maybe we need board member consensus that that's something that everyone's in agreement with. Is that how folks would recommend we move forward?
I recommend that we not exclude tribes.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I don't, I think we have policy on here from staff. We probably outside of our pool on that. I think we can certainly pass along to the board that we think this is a good idea, but I think that's got to come out of the policy shop at DCR. So we like that idea in spirit, I think essentially is what we can say.
Recommend.
Yeah, you all might want to refer back to sort of the full comments. The individual that made a specific comment on this during the listening session also asked for tribes to be represented on the VLCF board and on the technical committee, so all of which would require code changes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Lee, and I didn't see that she was on the meeting today.
So Tom, let me ask you a process question. And so let's say that this subcommittee today, we all agree that we should recommend a change in the law to make tribes eligible to apply for grants. Then would the policy staff analyze that and get back to us with their analysis? I mean, there may be a reason not to do it. I can't imagine what it is, but.
So we all have the same boss, the governor, and the way legislation happens through the administration is agencies recommend, pieces of legislation through the summer, and the governor's policy office makes determinations on which pieces of legislation would go forward or not to the General Assembly from the administration.
Well, I know that. I'm asking
it would
about
go through
staffing us. Would we get a policy analysis of whatever we decide? I mean, we're all operating in good faith here, but some of you are the experts.
Well, the policy analysis would really be with the governor's policy office, not with us at DCR.
So is this body intended to do, I think, as Jay suggested, which is form recommendations and then bring them to the full board and then have some process from there? Is that, I mean, we certainly can't, it's my impression that we're not bypassing the formal board in any decisions, but rather discussing and then bringing things back to the board, just a regular kind of subcommittee or working group.
Making recommendations for the full board.
Yep.
Is that accurate,
Well,
Tom?
I mean, that's how I've interpreted it, Bruce.
Yeah.
Yep. So perhaps we focus on making those recommendations and do it in as formalized nature as we can in this subcommittee. And then what we discuss would then be brought forward in a formal board meeting, at which point we would ask Glenda, to your point, that whomever, tackles the issue of whether it's including it in DCR's legislative packet or however things move forward, typically, then that would be discussed then. Does that work?
Sounds good to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how formally we need to follow Robert's rules here. But we can make some formal recommendations and we can vote on them. So it's as formal as possible, or we can just note that we're recommending that the issue be brought forward the board in the future, in the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I would suggest that amongst the 4 board members, you sort of keep track of these and, as I had said earlier, then present them to Secretary Strickler to go onto the board.
Onto the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. Is anyone on staff taking minutes in this meeting? Okay.
Yeah, Mike Fletcher's taking minutes.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna take notes. Okay. Next, kind of process issue that the board wants to talk about, board members.
So I think the bulk of these first non-code specific comments really go to process here. So maybe it would be helpful if we start just right at the top and Stu or anyone else on staff that wants to provide context so we can fully better understand what is being said here with streamlined application process or make it 2 steps. Where were they driving at here? That's clearly an access and ability to apply question. So I view that as an access issue.
For this, streamlining the application process or making it 2 steps, there were 2 people that said our application process is onerous and it would be nice if we could streamline it or make it a 2-step process. So they could submit a shorter application and then provide more information later once they were chosen. Or I'm not really sure if we would have to do 2 grant rounds for that. And another person who also said that there could be a two-step process for applications, like a back and forth with the applications. But that would mean sort of reconfiguring how we do the whole application process. And this year, for instance, we have 3 grant rounds with finishing up the FY21 that we just did in February. We're in a grant round now, and then we hope to kick off another one in June. So it seems like if we did a 2-step process, it would be very confusing to me, unless, anyway.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but once once someone's in the application process, you usually have a pretty open line of communication. There's a lot of back and forth.
Sure.
And so, personally, I'm not as concerned about the application process. I think we want the application to be robust. I'm more concerned about making sure the applicant pool is expanded and that we're doing a better job on the front end of getting people into that process and providing assistance. But I'd be interested in what the other board members think.
Well, I have also heard that the application process is complicated and difficult, but I also have heard several times that the staff is very helpful. And so I don't intend that as a criticism by any means. And, you know, you've got to have a lot of solid information just to evaluate the merit of an application. So I appreciate that. So 2 things. I would be curious if the staff has any suggestions for how to, quote, streamline the process. And then 2, I endorse what Jay just said about expanding outreach.
Larry and I both agree that our application, we tried to trim it down, and I think it wound up making it bigger. So it can be, you know, we can consistently work to try to make it more succinct, but there's so many details that need to be fleshed out in the grant manual, because our grant agreements with the awards refer back to the grant manual. So we want to make sure that it says what we want it to say, and that can lead to getting a little too long. But we would love to be able to streamline the application, the grant manual, to make it more clear and more simple. And we strive to do that with each grant manual.
Yeah, I added in the chat, if anyone from the stakeholder community that's on the call, from the land trust community, could elaborate on how streamlining might be possible. I'm not sure what kind of open discourse we can have with people coming off mute and things like that, but that might be really helpful in this instance. So it'd be great if anybody wants to. I wondered if it was related to the pre-application having a different scoring, or not a mirrored scoring perfectly to the grant manual. I wondered if that was what the comment was, and but that's just my interpretation of it.
While we wait on comments there, I'd like to ask staff a question about outreach, and Jay and Linda both brought this up. Can you walk us through the current process when the grant rounds open? I mean, is there a press release, a posting on the website? Is there further outreach currently being done to specific populations, disadvantaged populations? We just want a better idea of that before we make comment.
Sure. Currently, Larry, please step in if I'm forgetting anything. We do post it on our website, and then Larry sends emails out to all of the localities, soil and water conservation districts, and anyone who's ever expressed interest in a VLCF grant. We add them to our list as we go forward. Who else,
600,
Larry?
there are 600 entities now on the list.
On the email list that we send the announcement out to. Wow.
We tried to cover everything.
we
We
posted
added tribes. I'm sorry. We added tribes about 2 rounds ago,
Mhm.
so they are now being notified.
Well, this is Glenda. I remember
we
pre-pandemic.
posted the listserv.
I don't know what he just said.
I couldn't hear you either, Tom. You're on mute now. Tom, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
I know.
Okay.
I have like a 10-second delay on my mute unmute button. So sorry, Glenda, I stopped talking because I thought I was interrupting you, but I was saying that it goes out to a number of listservs as well, like the Vault listserv. It goes out to every locality because we tie into any entity that our planning and recreation resources has touch with in terms of recreation trails grants or federal land and water conservation grants. So we have been trying to step that up. I mean, perhaps, one area that we could try to do more in is emphasizing to people that, we encourage them to ask us questions, but we can overemphasize we're open to questions and working with people as they develop their applications.
Tom, I remember about, I think it was about 2 years ago, pre-pandemic anyway, the Virginia Conservation Network had one of their meetings, and they brought into that meeting what I would say are a lot of underrepresented groups like Hispanics, Latinos, African Americans, and others. And I at the time recommended, that we try to connect with some of those groups through the, and I don't know whether we have. And I also raised this with the governor's, now I've forgotten his name, I'm sorry. But Sue, you connected me with him after our last meeting. So I think all the organizations you mentioned are good, except with local governments. I don't know, like in our case, within Alexandria or Fairfax County, there would be multiple, points of contact. And if it lands with the Board of Supervisors, Chairman's Chief of Staff, it may or may not reach the right people. And I don't know the answer, but I'm just making the point. Okay, Jay, I think you want to say something. Sorry.
Well, I don't want to step on your comment, but I have to say I'm not that concerned about whether or not Fairfax will be aware there's money. And so I am a lot more concerned about maybe some of the vulnerable communities around the states. As we discussed earlier, there are a multitude of screening tools. If we're looking at a vulnerability index or an EJ screening tool from the EPA, to me, the difficulty is how do you make meaningful inroads to those communities? I know in pre-pandemic times, we were doing a pre-application meeting, and it's a hugely important meeting to get people to understand what can be a daunting process from the beginning. But I think we're having it in Charlottesville. And one thing that I would hope to see post-pandemic is when we do this pre-application work, that we try and get into the communities that we hope to see reflected in the grant pool, and make sure that we're, I say this all 100% recognizing that it is like just asking you all to do more for nothing, and I'm sorry, but I after reviewing the DCR DEIJ report the other day, I got to thinking about this again. And that to me is where this process is breaking down, is it is a complicated process. It should be a complicated process. We have a fiduciary responsibility to Virginia taxpayers for this money, but we have got to find a way to make it accessible to underserved communities. And that to me means a more robust recruitment at the front end. And taking that pre-application process on the road, essentially. I mean, you've got to recruit for this. And because most people don't know it exists, or that you all have some flexibility to work with communities, which we've discussed in the past as well. And I think I've never seen an applicant that once they got in conversation with you, you all weren't able to try and meet them if it was a worthy project, because you all do a great job, but it's making those connections. And I think that's what we really should be focused on if we want to do a better job in DEIJ and EJ outreach through this work.
I want to piggyback on what Jay said here. I have some recommendations. It's one thing to send information to underserved community that represent underserved communities, to include them on the distribution list, but it's also another step to, like Jay is saying, have an actual meaningful dialogue there to build trust, build awareness. And I agree with them. It will take extra work, and I know you all staff work very hard and time is precious, but if this is a statewide initiative from the governor for more equity and outreach to underserved communities, I want us as a board to really walk the talk and help the staff make the effort. So I'd like to raise this issue to the whole board as part of our recommendations. It's been bubbling up here and there, but I'd like us to take it more seriously going forward.
And I'll jump in. This is Tom Smith again, just to say that, this is one of multiple sources of state money for land conservation. So not to make it more complicated, but, we could also think about making sure that we're teaming up with the other agencies and programs as part of this awareness campaign.
One thing that we could look to is how VOF has successfully reached their kind of new grant program related to urban spaces. That might be an example that we could learn from. I'm not sure what their process is, but I know that that's a new program area for them. So there might be an opportunity to learn how they've developed that program and that outreach.
Hi, this is Martha Little with Virginia Outdoors Foundation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was gonna say the same thing as Tom Smith and say that we probably should team up, because we are doing a lot and trying to expand our outreach. In particular, we have the Get Outdoors Fund, which is focused solely on underserved communities, and we have the PTF Public Access Fund, and then I see Jason mentioned in the chat that we've also got our MVP core, where we're focusing on underserved communities. So we are working really hard to expand our outreach. We have regional staff across the state that's really focused on doing that right now. And we are going to open up an office in Hampton Roads, because we don't really have any staffing down there. We noticed that was a big gap. So, but anyway, I agree with Tom that we probably could do a better job if we all teamed up and did some more work together on that point. So
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, so Bruce, let's go with your recommendation. We'll add that to our working list of things to take back to the VLCF board. And it seems like there's some good models that we can, and by we, I mean board and DCR staff, can develop and learn from. One thing that also might need to be considered in that same conversation is the threshold of the 50% match. I don't know how, I understand that's a programmatic change, but that is it's tough for, yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Sue, is that something that could be addressed at the board level, or does that require code change for us to discuss the match?
The match would require a code change.
Okay.
Well, I think it might be, I mean, I still think we should move forward and just talk about it at the board level, because a sliding match for underrepresented and underserved communities is certainly appropriate for lots of grant programs. So
Yeah, VLCF, I'm sorry, is very generous with our match, or what we accept as match. We do accept, like, VOF grants would be match.
that is helpful.
Goods, yeah, cookies.
Yeah, I do. VLCF so generous. It really is a wonderful wide breadth, but so it takes, like, a lot of experience with grant programs to know how to massage a match, how to frame a match in an application, and how to really comprehend what the match means. Like, if you're not living in grant land all the time, then it can,
Sure.
It can certainly be a deterrent because it's not understood, or just no experience to actually figure out how to do it. So yeah, I think that's great. So I'm going to add that to my list for things to go up. I was, looking at some of the comments that specifically related to the first bullet, streamlining the application process, and wondered if, the staff and the board could kind of talk just a little bit about feasibility and whether, it's possible within, the limits and constraints of staff time. And Susan, you alluded to this about, this would require like 6 steps as opposed to the 3 that are already in place. But, the comments were made in the listening session from PEC. Peter said the pre-application rounds, if that application was far less lengthy in terms of what's required for submittal, then there could be a first round cut, and the applicants that make the first round cut would then supply the sophisticated, more in detail application to follow. So that's, one comment. And then Matt from Northern Virginia said something similar. The pre-application leads to callbacks rather than just informing the scope of need to the General Assembly, which is, I understand the pre-applications process, but rather really a cut. So that means that, a poor fit application wouldn't be, staff wouldn't expend such significant time for something that wouldn't make the cut. And this kind of, gets to what I understand we're probably not going to get to today, but the oversubscription to the open space categories. I mean, if an applicant is spending, I write grants all day long for my job, and I understand the threshold that's required for a grant application. It's significant. And if there are only, 4 grants that get accepted and into the open space category, I think people will start to, and may already be, discouraged by, their lack of chance. So just something to think of. So what is this an impossible request, the pre-application process? I know that you've developed it, and is it possible to lighten the ask and create some sort of round 1, round 2 approach?
I mean, I think it's a pretty heavy lift. I would much rather see us put more energy into making sure applicants know they can work with staff to get in the right category and do the best application. If we go in, I mean, I think if we go into sort of 2 rounds for 1 grant round, it would double everything. We'd have a new grant manual, which the board would have to review and approve. We would have, the board would have to make those decisions about what passed the first round and went on to, the final round. I'm not sure that it really simplifies things for people.
Well, Sue,
Sorry to jump in.
For me, I guess I'd be interested in kind of taking a step back and looking at our timetable annually more generally, and maybe bringing in the last bullet on here with our with the legislation in 2019 and the concept of providing this pre-application or what is the pre-application process as we're currently doing it, but having in preparation for the meeting and seeing some of the comments, I did take a look back at the legislation, and I'm not really sure a pre-application process is what we were supposed to be doing. And so I guess I have, I'm interested in staff thoughts on the idea that what I read the bill to say is that we really should have done a full review of the grants, of the applicants in the fall to be able to turn over essentially a lexical ordering of projects to the General Assembly in mid-December. And then that way they would be able to match it to essentially the appropriation and know how far that money's going to get them. And then we would be able to finalize that in the spring. At least that's how I'm reading that paragraph that was added in 2019. That process, I'm not commenting on whether or not that's the right process or not. I'm just wondering, since we have people saying, we want to drag this out a little bit, is there a way to, I guess, address both concerns at the same time, since we do have this statutory authority now, or not authority, requirement to provide this information to the General Assembly. And you all have done a great job crunching those pre-application numbers, and I think there's a good argument to be had that showing need in the macro sense is a compelling argument for legislators. But I also think, based on what we saw this last session, legislators like projects, and I'm wondering if we hewed closer to what the language says in the legislation from 2019 and actually gave them a list where they could say 10 million gets me through 7 of these, 15 gets me through 12 of these, including that one in my district. Do we get a better response from the funding side? And by breaking that up into a fall vote and then a spring, once the appropriation's been made, do we make it easier for people to access the process? Sorry, that was a lot, but what are your thoughts on this?
That is a lot. And I guess, I go back to what we were just talking about with reaching out to underserved localities. And how to do that in this type of process. It's a lot and then this year we have 3 grant rounds. So it would delay all of those grant rounds. I don't know how we would do it the way you just spoke about with the actual grant rounds.
That's a really fair answer. It's not possible. Impossible is a reasonable response.
Okay. And the pre-application process, the way we have it now, takes in a much bigger universe of projects than are grant ready to close in 2 years, right? Those are my initial reactions to your question.
So I guess through your response, not possible with how things are scheduled, you know, in the near future, is it something that we should be considering for the future that's right after that? I mean, are we following the code as we're supposed to?
It, as I understood it, we were doing our best to follow the code and came up with that pre-application report to satisfy this, as well as the grant rounds.
Yeah, I mean, the consultation we've done with the Secretary's office and the Office of the Attorney General, we're in compliance with the code and doing our best there.
Yeah, I think again, you all have done a wonderful job. And I think without making a pronouncement on what exactly, I never want to assume what's in the mind of legislators. It's a special place that is theirs alone. But I think the part that throws me off in the code is that it does specifically call for project rankings. And that to me, that says we had to have done an analysis and to essentially say, here's what you're going to get funded given the appropriation. But again, not to say that one process is better than the other. I think when legislators get a big number, 100 million and change, and say this is, the quote need, I think a lot of them are savvy enough to say, yeah, but how many are in this pipeline to actually come up the next year? And so they may have a tendency to dismiss it. And if our objective is to say we want them to fund this to the maximum extent possible year to year, it's worth exploring the question of whether or not they'd be more responsive to a project with a number that's next to it in their district. And so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to unpack a can of worms, but it is something I'd like for us to consider further, maybe at the full board, just because this is something we talk about year after year, is how can we as board members do a more effective job with the GA advocating for this appropriation and really conveying the importance. I think I can say charitably, we haven't cracked that nut yet, having some years with $0. So we're still pretty swingy. I don't know what the compelling argument is, but I don't want to leave any rocks unturned.
We do, just to clarify, we do score the pre-applications and send them a ranked list. But as you all know, when we score the grant applications, we don't necessarily fund every application at 100%. We try to work with the applicants to get the funding to go as far as possible as well. Just to throw that in there as another question of how that would work in a different approach. Okay.
Mary Carson, I think we have touched on each of these items on this slide.
All right.
So I know on the agenda we're in our public comment period, which I don't want to encroach in because it's sort of the point of this meeting. So I have a lot of thoughts and comments about the category scoring issue, and know that this was an issue that came up in the listening session and has been, anyway, it's been something that has continually come up. And so I don't know, we might need to table it for a future meeting, just knowing what the time is and wanting to ensure the public is commenting. What do folks think about that?
Mary Carson, I know these issues are important to you and perhaps other board members. Could a general issue be pushed forth for discussion with the
Okay.
full board?
Yeah, I mean, I like the comments that were made during the listening session were very intentional. The drinking water issue, certainly population factoring in. As someone who represents a very urban district, I can really appreciate this and wanting to kind of make things a little bit more fair in the sense that conservation in urban areas is important, although the size might be much diminished as opposed to some other parts of the state. So, you know, those issues are something that I really do want to talk about. But I think kind of the most commonly heard one and probably the largest issue is the open space category, open space and parks category being just way oversubscribed. I mean, it seems impossible not to talk about if we're going to talk about, you know, application process and ensuring that expectations are somehow clear and things are fair. I don't know if one of the recommendations made in the listening session talked about, I'm just looking for my notes, talked about how the standards in other sections could be a way that we could potentially address this oversubscription in at least some of the categories. And I know that changing the categories and the equal distribution of funding is a statutory change, right? It is something that's required in code. But I wonder if modifying the standards for the sections and how the applicants are placed in the sections might be a way to kind of get around the larger issue. But Bruce, I appreciate your comment, and I don't know how other board members feel, but I do think that a conversation with the larger board might be helpful to at least begin starting to talk about this issue.
Sure, I support that.
Thumbs up from Jay.
Mhm.
Glenda. Yeah, okay. I'll add it to the recommendation for discussion at the VLCF meeting. Okay. Should we open it up for public comment?
I think
Feel
we
like-
should.
Yeah, okay. Sue, if you have any advice for how we do that, if it's just a kind of whoever wants to participate, it's great.
Yeah, I think we had asked people to put their name in the comments, but we have a pretty small group. So I think we could. Either way, if someone wants to speak, let us know in the comments. And we will call on you. Let's see. And just, let's see, Nikki, okay. And nobody has said anything in our chat.
Folks could just unmute if they need to.
Nikki's posted, I don't need to speak, just want to thank the committee for having exactly the conversation that is needed.
This is Carl Didier from Department of Forestry. I like these category scoring comments. It seems to me that, at least within the forestry category, I can try to work to see if we can incorporate a little bit better some of these things, especially, underserved communities, that kind of thing. It's not at all incorporated in the forestry category as far as I know. And I think we could find ways to do that. I know that underserved communities is one of the additional criteria already. So all projects, if they have additional communities and they're in the social vulnerability index, get some points. But ways to pump that up is to include that in the individual categories themselves too, in the scoring of the individual categories. So I think those are things that we can definitely discuss and figure out how to do. I'm trying to think. I don't think I have any. If I have anything else, I'll pop back in.
Thanks, Carl.
I'd like to weigh in on that if I understood it correctly. I was having trouble hearing it, but and maybe this is just semantics, but it's from my perspective, it's larger than quote communities. It's underserved organizations, underserved individuals, especially, you know, like in the historic category, events, people, places that have been overlooked, you know, women's history or Native American history, or take the case of enslaved Virginians who, you know, who didn't own property. And so I'm just trying to say that, you know, the concept is more than a community with geographic boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning. This is Wendy Austin with Friends of the Lower Appomattox River. I just want to say we serve the areas of the city of Petersburg and Hopewell, two of the, I would say, you know, underserved type communities. And I really appreciate the conversation and thought to that. And it is complex, and so many of the issues go around the smallness, lack of staff capacity. And I think to the point of Matt's is, you know, when you don't have a lot of staff and time, if you see this requires match, that's not something that's possible, you know, so there is a lot of explanation and hand-holding and that sort of thing that would help the communities, the smaller communities like the ones that we serve. And also, we were privileged to have just been awarded a VLCF grant and a VOF grant, so we are thrilled about that, but the process was daunting. It is a lot of information compile and have knowledge of. You really have to be involved and on it, you know, to gather all of that. So I do think the effort to try to reach out to the underserved communities is so important, and it does take time, and VOF is doing a great job of it. Thank you. And, you know, we'd love to participate and provide any suggestions as possible. So thanks for addressing this, and thanks for this listening session.
I just wanted to share our funding map, because it's interesting, Jay. I remember when we presented the VLCF mapper, you'd said there's a lot of holes in the state that haven't received VLCF funding, and that it's, I don't know, it's just it's interesting to see like what those communities are, that those localities are that haven't gotten any grants from us yet.
Yeah, what do we have against Nelson? They do to us.
Pipeline.
Someone that's in my district, and as someone who used to live in Nelson County, you know, many beautiful spaces for preservation.
It does strike me as, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. This map might be improved by having an indication of how many applications have come in different counties and for different localities, and what kind of proportion of acceptance and rejection rate we've had. That might give us an indication of where more support could be given.
I think that's an excellent data set to have. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We've looked at that. I guess it was right before COVID hit, right, Gina? She mapped out where existing state parks are and other public access points to compare to this, and did more. This map doesn't have, like I said, the numbers on it, but we have all of that information and everything. Yeah, we could do more with the data for sure.
Rob Evans posted in the chat an additional scoring, or adding additional scoring points for first project in a new county.
Completely non sequitur, Sue, but this is something that pops into my head occasionally. What is our definition for what constitutes public access?
We have it broken out into points. More points are awarded for being open 365 days a year to visual access. So it's a sliding scale. And public access is also included in open space and parks, as well as the additional scoring criteria, which is defined differently in each one. So we have different definitions.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Does
Oh, sorry.
does the easement data set that we put up on the Natural History Data Explorer indicate which easements have public access on them?
I don't think so. Do you, Tom?
I don't think so.
I guess it's one thing to allow it. It's another thing to tell people they can go there.
Oh, yeah.
And for them to be aware of it.
We do not, for a number of the other categories, it indicates sort of what the public access level is, but for easements, it doesn't, because of the large number of easements, it basically means reading every easement document to figure out if public access is allowed, and we have not done that. No.
Intern.
We got another question that popped up in the chat box from Pat. I don't know if they want to expand upon it, but they were wondering how we recommend identifying underserved communities, such as those who haven't sought funding in the past, or any other tools.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because at first, when we started looking at this, Jay, we were saying like underserved by VLCF, these counties that haven't gotten our funding. But of course, since then, it's been more focused on socially vulnerable communities. And so I think it's both, really. But as our scoring is now, it is more the socially vulnerable communities that get points, not counties that haven't gotten gotten awards in the past.
So is staff running it through the VIMS vulnerability index, or are you telling applicants they can utilize that or the EJ screener tool in putting their application together?
We asked them to do it, and we suggest the VIMS model, but also recommend that they could use other models like the EPA model to see which one they would score better in. Does that make sense? And then then we also look at it when we're scoring it to make sure we agree with what they gave us.
Okay.
We might also ask Pat Calvert to give us some recommendations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Pat says he doesn't have a mic on his computer, so maybe he'll add something.
There's always email.
Very, very convenient, Pat. Do they even make computers without mics now?
So where are we now? Are we winding up, or what are we? We'll have to have another meeting, won't we? Because I think there are a lot more issues to discuss.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're supposed to, I think that we have an end at 11:30. So there was just a couple. Wendy Austin made a comment in the chat as well about open space and parks. And the chat will be available for, a copy will be made available, correct, Sue?
I hope so. Mike, are you able to do that?
Yes. It
Awesome.
automatically downloads when I leave the meeting, so I'll include that as part of the minutes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Pat's going to text suggestions to Jay tonight at 11 p.m. So that's helpful, Pat. So I mean, I guess since I've been made chair of this group, I think I can adjourn. I mean, I think that we've had some really nice engagement, and just want to thank the DCR staff and the VLCF staff again for putting this together and for serving the VLCF board and doing so much to advance land conservation in Virginia. We really appreciate all of y'all's work, and are grateful for the opportunity to meet as a subcommittee and look forward to future conversations. To summarize, the kind of issues that we want to talk about include Virginia tribes, how to accommodate them, how to better and best do low-income outreach, and how low-income applicants vary from more experienced applicants. A look at the legislative language from 2019 and how to best meet the requirements in that language, with a particular look at ranking to go to legislators. And then a conversation about how to meet the interests of the stakeholders related to the application process, which is related to that legislative language from 2019. And then finally, a look at the open space and parks category oversubscription, with the door opening to conversations about how to either shift standards in the categories or look at the categories as a whole, which I suspect will happen in a future subcommittee meeting, but just to open the door to that conversation. Does that sound good? Is that what we talked about?
That sounds good.
Good summary?
Well, we had those two at the beginning on, putting materials on the website for the public, and then at our meetings, public comments before voting.
Correct, right. And that was check, right? And we can report out to the board that those changes were already made, or will be made and are already being made.
I think it's a half one. One is made, and the other, yeah, the other, I think, if I heard Sue correctly, our full board convenes at the call of the secretary, so they'd have to approve that. But just to be specific on what we did.
Okay.
I can't imagine them saying no, but just
so at the next
clear.
Yeah, at the next VLCF meeting, the question will be, may we move the comment period up and have that be a change that continues through time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. Thank you all so much. Thank you, DCR and other state agency staff that are here. We really appreciate.
I really appreciate all the work the staff does on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for having those listening sessions too. That was very,
that
very
was great.
helpful.
It was so good.
Yeah, that was great.
And thanks
Thank
to
you
this.
all very much.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. That was still being recorded. An organizer, start your recording. Hi.
I did the recording, so I'll stop that.
Okay.
Ready to stop.